The Marines at FOB Nightingale called her stupid, though never to her face. They used other words. Slow, simple, blank. She was Warrant Officer Anya Sharma, a name that felt foreign on their tongues, and her presence was an unwelcome riddle. They saw a woman with a quiet, unnerving stillness, someone who could stand for an hour watching a heat shimmer rise from the tarmac without twitching a muscle. They mistook her observation for vacancy, her silence for a lack of understanding. The colonel in charge thought she was a problem sent from on high, a quota filler with a file so redacted it was mostly black ink. He was about to learn that the black ink wasn't hiding a lack of qualification, but a level of expertise he couldn't possibly comprehend. The first sign came when the pride of their air wing, an F-35B, coughed, sputtered, and died on the runway, its billion-dollar heart gone silent. While his best men panicked, Sharma simply picked up a wrench. Her arrival had been as quiet as the woman herself. A single canvas duffel bag, a set of crisp, new desert utilities, and orders that had sent ripples of confusion through the base command structure. Warrant Officer Anya Sharma was assigned to the maintenance squadron, but her specialization was listed as Expedient Technical Solutions, a vague, bureaucratic term that meant nothing to the grease-stained mechanics of Marine All-Weather Fighter Attack Squadron 242. They were used to rigid specialties: avionics, hydraulics, power plants. Sharma's file offered none of that clarity. She just appeared one blistering afternoon, stepping out of the back of a dust-caked transport truck, her dark eyes sweeping over the landscape of prefabricated buildings and HESCO barriers with an unnerving placidity. Master Gunnery Sergeant Rex Gunny Miller, the hangar chief, had greeted her with a grunt. He was a man whose knuckles were permanently scarred and whose patience was worn thin by 2 decades of desert deployments. He looked at her clean uniform, her lack of familiar squadron patches, and the calm, almost detached expression on her face. He saw a liability. Sharma, he'd read from the clipboard, mispronouncing it, right? Find a rack in the warrant's quarters. Orientation is at 0600. Don't be late. And stay out of the way. He hadn't waited for a reply, turning his back and stalking off toward the cavernous maw of the main hangar, leaving her standing in the swirling dust. She watched him go, her expression unchanging. She noted the slight limp in his left leg, the way he favored it when he turned, the worn spot on his belt where his sidearm had rubbed for years. She saw the fatigue in the slump of his shoulders and the deep-set lines around his eyes. She saw a good man running on fumes. The younger Marines were less subtle. PFC Omar Benitez and PFC Kenji Tanaka, 2 of the squadron's more promising junior mechanics, watched her from the shade of a wingtip. That's her, Benitez muttered, chewing on a matchstick. The new WO? Looks like she'll get blown over by the jet wash, Tanaka shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a greasy hand. Heard her file's a ghost. Colonel Thorne's pissed. Thinks she's some kind of diversity push from division. They watched as Sharma shouldered her bag and walked toward the designated barracks, her gait measured and even, a stark contrast to the swaggering roll of the Marines around her. Her movements were economical, efficient, devoid of any wasted energy. They saw it as robotic, strange. They didn't see the discipline of a body trained to conserve every calorie, to exist in a state of patient readiness. They nicknamed her the Ghost within the hour. It was a name born of suspicion and a fundamental misunderstanding of the woman who now walked among them. Colonel Marcus Thorne held her personnel file in his hands, but the paper felt weightless, empty. He stared at the single sheet, a document that should have been thick with commendations, fitness reports, and training certifications. Instead, it was a ghost story written in redactions. Her name, rank, date of service entry, and a single unhelpful line, specialization, ETS below that. Entire paragraphs were blacked out. Her previous units were classified. Her training schools were classified. Even her goddamn boot camp location was hidden behind a censor's unforgiving marker. He tossed the file onto his polished oak desk, the slap of paper echoing in the silent, air-conditioned chill of his command office. It was an insult. He was the commanding officer of one of the most advanced fighter squadrons in the Marine Corps, stationed at the tip of the spear, and some desk jockey at the Pentagon had sent him a mystery box with a pulse. He leaned back in his leather chair, the springs groaning in protest. He looked at the awards on his wall, the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star with a Combat V, the neatly framed photograph of him shaking hands with a 4-star general. He had earned his command through decades of grit, sweat, and screaming jet engines. He understood the Corps. He understood its structures, its hierarchies, its people. He understood men who followed orders, who fixed what was broken, and who weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. He did not understand Warrant Officer Anya Sharma. She had been on his base for 72 hours, and in that time, she had said a total of 6 words. Yes, sir, no, Gunny. Thank you, that was it. She didn't fraternize. She didn't boast. She didn't even seem to sweat in the oppressive 120-degree heat. She just existed. He'd called her into his office that morning, determined to get a measure of the woman. She stood before his desk at a perfect position of attention, her gaze fixed on the wall just over his shoulder. She was of average height, with a lean, wiry build that her loose-fitting uniform did little to conceal. Her face was a mask of professional neutrality. "Warrant Officer," he began, his tone clipped and formal. "Your file is incomplete," he paused, waiting for a reaction. A flicker of nervousness, an explanation, anything. He got nothing. Her breathing didn't even seem to change. "It tells me nothing about what you can do, what you're trained for. This is a frontline aviation unit, Sharma. We don't have room for personnel who can't pull their weight. What, exactly, is your function here?" Her eyes finally met his. They were dark and deep, and for a fleeting second, he felt an unnerving sense of being analyzed, catalogued, and dismissed. The feeling vanished as quickly as it came. "My function is to solve problems, sir," she said. Her voice was low and steady, without inflection. "What kind of problems?" Thorne pressed, his irritation growing. "Technical problems, sir. The kind others can't." The sheer, unadorned confidence in her statement, delivered with zero arrogance, was baffling. It wasn't a boast. It was a statement of fact, like saying the sky was blue. Thorne snorted, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Right? Well, out here our problems have names. They're called F-135 engines and advanced targeting pods. They're handled by Marines with years of specialized training. Gunny Miller will assign you to inventory duty. You can count nuts and bolts. Try not to get in the way of the real work." He waved a hand, a clear gesture of dismissal. "That will be all." She gave a crisp nod. "Yes, sir." Then she executed a perfect about-face and walked out of his office, leaving Colonel Thorne with the distinct and infuriating feeling that he had just been humored. For 3 weeks, Anya counted nuts and bolts. She organized tool cribs. She cataloged spare parts with a quiet, methodical focus that bordered on the monastic. The other Marines in the maintenance bay saw her as a fixture, a silent presence who moved through the hangar like a shadow. She was assigned the most tedious, mind-numbing tasks, the jobs reserved for boots or Marines on punishment detail. Gunny Miller, following the colonel's orders, kept her far away from the aircraft. He didn't have time to babysit a mystery warrant officer while trying to keep a squadron of the world's most complex fighter jets in the air. Anya never complained. She never questioned her assignments. She simply did the work, flawlessly and efficiently, and then she observed. Her real work began when the assigned tasks were done. She would stand near the edge of the maintenance bay, out of the way, and watch. Her eyes would trace the lines of hydraulic tubing, follow the complex choreography of the ground crews, and listen to the symphony of the hangar, the whine of pneumatic wrenches, the sharp crack of a dropped tool, the shouted jargon between technicians. She wasn't just watching. She was learning the rhythm of the squadron. She saw the subtle hesitation in PFC Tanaka's hands when he worked on the avionics bus, a sign of waning confidence after a recent reprimand. She saw the way Benitez always over-torqued the fasteners on the landing gear panels, a small act of aggression born from frustration. She noticed that the number 3 jet in the lineup, a bird they called Bad Penny, had a faint, almost imperceptible harmonic tremor in its auxiliary power unit, a vibration no one else seemed to detect. She filed it away. She spent hours in the base's small, stuffy technical library, pulling up schematics for the F-35B. She didn't just look at the engine diagrams. She studied the entire ecosystem of the aircraft. She cross-referenced the Pratt & Whitney F-135 engine's performance data with the environmental reports for the region, noting the high concentration of abrasive silicate particles in the local dust. She read the maintenance logs for the entire squadron going back a full year. She saw a pattern the frantic, overworked technicians had missed. A steady, incremental increase in exhaust gas temperatures across all the jets, coupled with a slight but consistent drop in fuel efficiency. The sand was getting in. It was acting like a slow, grinding poison, wearing down tolerances, eroding compressor blades, and stressing the delicate internal components to their breaking point. One evening, Gunny Miller found her staring at a diagnostic monitor displaying the telemetry from a recent flight. "Something you need, warrant officer?" he asked, his voice thick with suspicion. Anya didn't turn. She pointed a single, steady finger at a fluctuating waveform on the screen. "The fuel flow regulator on aircraft 704, she said, her voice a low murmur. "It's compensating for a pressure drop in the primary combustion chamber. The injector nozzles are likely partially clogged." Gunny Miller squinted at the screen. He saw a normal data stream. The computer wasn't flagging any errors. "The diagnostics are green, Sharma. It's fine." "The computer is compensating, Gunny," she replied calmly. "It's doing its job. But the underlying issue is there. The nozzles are fouled. In another 20 flight hours, they'll fail. It will likely cause a compressor stall on takeoff." Gunny Miller stared at her, then back at the screen. He saw nothing. He saw a ghost, a woman they called stupid, spouting nonsense about a perfectly healthy aircraft. "Stick to counting bolts, warrant officer," he grumbled, and walked away, dismissing her observation as the ramblings of someone who didn't understand the complexities of the machine. Anya watched him go, her expression unreadable, and mentally added aircraft 704 to her list of ticking clocks. The crisis began not with a bang, but with a cough. Bad Penny, the very jet Anya had noted with the APU tremor, was on the pre-flight line, its engine spooling up for a critical mission. A long-range reconnaissance patrol had been pinned down by an unexpected enemy force, and they were screaming for air support. As the pilot pushed the throttle forward, the engine whined, then coughed. A sickening metallic sound that echoed across the flight line. A plume of black smoke erupted from the exhaust nozzle, and then silence. The F-135, a masterpiece of engineering that generated over 40,000 pounds of thrust, was dead. Panic, sharp and electric, shot through the maintenance crew. The pilot's voice, strained and laced with adrenaline, crackled over the radio. "Tower, Bad Penny is red-balled on the deck. Engine failure. I have a complete shutdown." Alarms blared in the control tower. On the ground, the crew swarmed the silent aircraft. Gunny Miller was the first one to the cockpit, his face a grim mask of controlled fury. Colonel Thorne's voice erupted over the command net, cold and sharp. "Miller, what is your status? I have Marines taking fire, and I need that bird in the air 5 minutes ago." "Engine is dead, Colonel. We're running diagnostics now," Miller yelled back, his voice nearly drowned out by the rising wind. A storm was brewing on the horizon, a wall of sand and dust that was moving in fast, threatening to ground all air operations for the next 12 hours. The window to save the trapped patrol was closing with terrifying speed. The diagnostics were a nightmare. A cascade of error codes flooded the screens of the maintenance laptops. "Catastrophic fuel pump failure," Tanaka shouted over the howl of the wind. "Multiple turbine blades are out of tolerance. It's showing a core breach." Benitez swore, his face pale. "A core breach? We can't fix that here. We'd have to pull the whole engine, ship it back to the States. That's a 3-week job, minimum." Gunny Miller slammed his fist against the fuselage of the jet. "We don't have 3 weeks. We don't have 3 hours." He stared at the dead engine, the heart of his squadron, feeling a profound sense of helplessness. Every protocol, every manual, Every bit of his 20 years of experience told him this was an insurmountable problem. The jet was a hangar queen, the patrol was on its own, and it was all happening on his watch. Amid the chaos, Anya Sharma remained an island of calm. She had been observing from a distance, her eyes missing nothing. She saw the frantic, uncoordinated movements of the crew. She saw Gunny Miller's despair. She heard the colonel's increasingly desperate calls over the radio. She felt the pressure in the air, a palpable thing that was causing trained professionals to make mistakes, to overlook details in their haste. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she didn't blink. She processed the data. A trapped patrol, an approaching storm, a grounded jet, and a diagnosis of catastrophic failure. She cross-referenced it with her own silent observations from the past weeks. The clogged injectors, the silicate dust, the systemic strain. The official diagnosis was wrong. It wasn't a random, catastrophic failure. It was a predictable, logical outcome, and she knew with absolute certainty that she could fix it. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't announce her intentions. She simply walked out of the hangar, her steps deliberate and unhurried, into the heart of the frantic scene. The other Marines, consumed by their own panic, barely noticed her. She approached the open-engine bay of the F-35, the wind tugging at her uniform. Gunny Miller was leaning against the landing gear, his head in his hands, talking to the colonel. "It's no good, sir. The engine is toast." "I can't." He trailed off as he saw her. Anya stood before him, her hand extended. In it, she held a single specialized tool, a calibrated microtorque wrench. "I need the access panel to the main fuel distributor opened, and a number 3 Phillips head with a magnetic tip," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise of the wind and the shouting. Gunny Miller stared at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Are you insane, Sharma? This is a multi-million-dollar engine, not a damn lawnmower. You're on inventory duty. Get the hell out of here before I write you up for interfering with a critical operation." Anya's gaze didn't waver. It was steady, patient, and utterly unimpressed by his anger. "The diagnostic is wrong," she stated simply. "It's reading a cascade failure triggered by a sensor malfunction. The primary fuel injector in cylinder 6 is clogged with fused silicate. It caused a back-pressure surge that tripped the core sensor and initiated an emergency shutdown. The turbine blades are fine. The fuel pump is fine. The core is intact." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "You have a patrol that is going to die, a storm that will be here in less than an hour, and a jet that I can make operational in 20 minutes. The choice is yours, Master Gunnery Sergeant." There was a moment of stunned silence. Benitez and Tanaka, who had been frantically trying to reboot the diagnostic system, froze and stared at her. Everything she had just said was impossible. No one could diagnose a problem that specific without hours of teardown and analysis. It was like a doctor diagnosing cancer by just looking at a patient's face. But the absolute, unwavering certainty in her voice gave them pause. Gunny Miller looked from Anya's calm face to the dead engine, then to the darkening horizon. He was out of options. Protocol was screaming at him to follow the book, to trust the computer. But the book was telling him his men were going to die. He looked back at the strange, silent woman who counted bolts and saw something he hadn't seen before. Not emptiness, but a terrifying, bottomless well of competence. He made a decision that would either save the day or end his career. He grunted, snatching a toolkit from the ground. "Benitez, Tanaka, get her whatever she asks for. Now, move." The change was instantaneous. The moment she was given the green light, Anya Sharma transformed. The quiet, observant ghost became a blur of focused, efficient motion. She didn't run. She moved with a liquid grace that was mesmerizing to watch. She slipped into the cramped engine bay, a space where most mechanics had to contort themselves, as if she were born there. Her hands, which they had only seen holding a clipboard, moved with the speed and precision of a surgeon. "Light," she commanded, not looking up. Tanaka fumbled with a high-intensity flashlight, shining it into the metallic guts of the engine. Hold it steady. Angle 45 degrees, her voice was devoid of emotion, a pure instrument of instruction. She called for tools by their precise designation, not their slang names. T-handle, 6mm hex. Pass me the borescope with the 90-degree articulation. Benitez, his earlier mockery forgotten, scrambled to keep up, laying out tools for her before she even asked, anticipating her needs with a dawning sense of awe. She worked in a sphere of intense concentration, the howling wind and the frantic radio chatter fading into a distant hum. Inside the engine, her world was one of millimeters and microns. She bypassed the standard diagnostic ports, plugging a small, unfamiliar interface she produced from her own pocket directly into the engine control unit. A string of code, unlike any they had ever seen, scrolled across her wrist-mounted display. She was talking to the machine in its native language. With the borescope, she navigated deep into the engine's core, to the exact injector she had named. On the small screen, the other mechanics saw it. A tiny, almost invisible blockage of glassy, melted sand, choking the life from the engine. It was exactly as she'd said. A collective gasp went through the small crowd of onlookers. How did she know? Benitez whispered. Gunny Miller just shook his head, his face a mask of disbelief. Anya didn't acknowledge their shock. She was already working on the solution. She couldn't replace the part, not here, not now. So she improvised. She took a length of high-tensile wire and a canister of pressurized solvent. With impossible dexterity, she manipulated the wire through the borescope's guide tube, using it as a micro-chisel to carefully break apart the silicate blockage while simultaneously flushing the debris with targeted bursts of solvent. It was a procedure that wasn't in any manual, a technique that bordered on mechanical witchcraft. 15 minutes later, she withdrew her tools. "Close it up," she said, her voice still calm. "Torque the panel fasteners to 120 foot-pounds. No more, no less." As Benitez and Tanaka scrambled to seal the engine bay, she walked to the cockpit and spoke quietly to the pilot. "When you start the engine, advance the throttle to 65% in a single, smooth motion. Hold it for 3 seconds, then idle. It will clear any remaining residue from the fuel line." She stepped back. Gunny Miller looked at her, then at the sealed engine. He keyed his radio, his voice strained. "Colonel, we're ready to attempt a restart." There was a pause, then Thorne's voice, tight with skepticism, came back. "On whose authority, Gunny?" Miller hesitated for a fraction of a second. He looked at Anya, who was now calmly wiping grease from her hands with a clean rag, her work done. "On mine, sir." In the cockpit, the pilot took a deep breath and followed the strange woman's instructions. He pushed the throttle forward. The engine whined, caught, and then roared to life with a clean, deafening blast of power. The sound was perfect. The diagnostics on the ground crew's laptops all flashed green. Bad Penny was alive. As the F-35B thundered down the runway and climbed into the bruised, stormy sky, a profound silence fell over the flight line. The group of hardened marine mechanics stood frozen, staring not at the departing jet, but at the quiet warrant officer who was now methodically cleaning the tools she had used. The transformation they had witnessed was too sudden, too absolute to process. The slow, simple woman they had dismissed as the ghost had just performed a surgical procedure on a $50 million engine with the calm assurance of someone changing a light bulb. She had done it in minutes under immense pressure and had diagnosed the problem without touching a single diagnostic tool. The mockery and dismissal that had filled the hangar for weeks had evaporated, replaced by a stunned, unnerving quiet. Benitez was the first to speak, his voice barely a whisper. "What the hell was that?" Tanaka just shook his head, his eyes wide. "I've never seen anything like it." She didn't even consult a manual. She just knew. They looked at their own hands, hands that had spent years training on these very machines, and felt a humbling sense of inadequacy. Their entire world of checklists, protocols, and technical orders had been rendered irrelevant by one woman's impossible intuition and skill. Gunny Miller walked over to the discarded diagnostic laptop. The screen still showed the initial error codes. Catastrophic core breach. He stared at it, then looked over at Anya, who was now placing the perfectly clean torque wrench back into its case. He had been a maintenance chief for 10 years. He could strip and rebuild a dozen different engines blindfolded. He had always believed that if a problem couldn't be solved by the book, it couldn't be solved at all. Anya Sharma had just taken his book, torn out every page, and rewritten it from memory. The report reached Colonel Thorne just as the first fat drops of rain began to fall. The F-35 was airborne, the patrol had been saved, and the engine was performing flawlessly. His initial relief was quickly overshadowed by a deep, gnawing suspicion. "Explain it to me again, Gunny," Thorne said into his handset, his voice low and dangerous. "You let an untested warrant officer with no listed power plant qualifications perform an unauthorized, non-protocol repair on my lead aircraft?" From the other end of the line, Miller's voice was steady, stripped of its earlier panic. "Sir, she didn't just repair it. She diagnosed a fault the entire system missed. She saved that jet and she saved those Marines. You'd have to have seen it to believe it." Thorne didn't want to believe it. It violated every principle of order and discipline he held dear. It was a fluke, a lucky guess. He was about to order Sharma's immediate arrest and confinement pending an investigation when the world went dark. The lights in his command post flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the room into an eerie twilight lit only by the emergency strobes. The hum of the air conditioner fell silent, replaced by the roar of the sandstorm outside. His communication console went dead. "Status!" he bellowed into the darkness. An aide with a flashlight responded, his voice shaky. "Total power failure, sir. The main generator just went down." The base was blind, deaf, and vulnerable. The perimeter sensors were offline. The command and control network was gone. The storm was now a raging beast, tearing at the camp, and his entire FOB was running on rapidly draining battery backups. The base's chief engineer, a flustered captain, was already on the radio, his voice frantic. "The primary transfer switch is fried. The surge protector failed. I can't get the backup generator to engage the grid. It's a complete system failure." Just as before, panic began to spread. The carefully constructed order of the military base was unraveling into chaos. Colonel Thorne felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. This was a new, more dangerous crisis, and once again he was helpless. The sandstorm hit FOB Nightingale with the force of a physical blow. The wind shrieked, a solid wall of sand that scoured paint from vehicles and reduced visibility to zero. Inside the main hangar, the emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows, turning the billion-dollar aircraft into skeletal beasts. The power failure had silenced the radios, plunging the maintenance crew into an isolating bubble of noise and fury. It was in this chaos that Anya Sharma acted again. While others were shouting, trying to find flashlights, or simply bracing against the storm, she was already moving. She had finished securing her toolkit just as the lights went out. Without a word, she turned and walked toward the hangar door, her silhouette framed for a moment against the swirling brown apocalypse outside before she disappeared into it. Gunny Miller, grabbing a heavy-duty flashlight, saw her go. "Sharma, where the hell are you going?" he yelled, but his voice was swallowed by the storm. On instinct, he followed Benitez and Tanaka close behind him. They found her outside the main power generator shed, a small, fortified bunker that housed the heart of the base. The steel door was locked. The base engineer and his team were on the other side of the compound, cut off by the storm, trying to find the manual override keys. Anya didn't wait. She knelt, examining the electronic lock mechanism. She pulled two small, insulated probes from a pouch on her belt, touched them to two specific pins on the control panel, and the heavy lock clicked open with a loud thud. The three Marines behind her stared, dumbfounded. Inside, the noise was deafening. The main diesel generator was sputtering and shaking, a victim of the power surge that had crippled the base. Red warning lights flashed on a complex control board, smelling of ozone and burnt electronics. Anya's eyes scanned the panel, her mind processing the data faster than any diagnostic computer. She ignored the primary controls. She saw the fried transfer switch, the melted relays, the obvious points of failure. But she also saw what the engineer had missed. A secondary power bus, an emergency backup system that wasn't on the standard schematics. It was part of an old, decommissioned system that had never been fully removed. She pointed. I need a pry bar and 20 feet of 4-gauge copper wire. Now Benitez sprinted back toward the hangar. Anya worked with a terrifying intensity. She ripped open a service panel with the pry bar, exposing a thick bundle of primary cables. Sparks flew as she began to reroute the connections, her movements sure and swift. She wasn't repairing the system. She was rebuilding it from the ground up, creating a new nervous system for the base on the fly. She bypassed the entire fried control board, physically connecting the backup generator directly to the main power grid through the old, forgotten bus. It was dangerous, unsanctioned, and brilliant. When Benitez returned with the copper wire, she stripped it with her teeth and began to bridge the final connections. The air crackled with raw electricity. For a moment, her body was haloed in a blue corona of St. Elmo's fire as she made the final connection. Then, with a deep, resonant hum, the backup generator roared to life, and the lights all across FOB Nightingale flickered on, steady and bright. The comms crackled back to life. The base was saved. Anya stood up, wiping a smear of soot from her cheek, her breathing even, her expression as calm as ever. Colonel Thorne stood in his fully lit command center, the communications console buzzing with reassuring life. The engineer was on the radio, his voice filled with utter bewilderment. Sir, I don't know what happened. The system just fixed itself. It's running on a bypass I've never seen before. It's not in the manual. Thorne knew. He knew with a sickening certainty who was responsible. Twice in one day, his base had been pushed to the brink of disaster. Twice, the established systems, the trained experts, and the official protocols had failed. And twice, this silent, enigmatic warrant officer had stepped out of the shadows and single-handedly pulled them back from the edge. The idea that it was luck was no longer just improbable. It was ridiculous. Flukes didn't happen twice. He had to know who she was. He sat down at his terminal, his hands shaking slightly. He pulled up Sharma's ghost file again. This time, he wasn't just looking. He was hunting. He initiated a secure satellite link to the Marine Corps Manpower and Reserve Affairs headquarters at Quantico. He got a duty officer, a young captain whose voice was thick with boredom. Thorne didn't waste time with pleasantries. This is Colonel Marcus Thorne at FOB Nightingale. I need information on a warrant officer Anya Sharma, service number 854291. I'm looking at her file and it's a brick wall. I need to know what's behind it. The captain sounded unimpressed. Sir, if the file is redacted at your clearance level, I can't help you. You'll need to file a formal request. Captain, Thorne interrupted, his voice like ice. I have an active combat situation here. This individual has performed 2 unauthorized, high-risk maintenance procedures on critical base infrastructure in the last 3 hours, and in both cases, she prevented a catastrophic failure. I am either going to award her a medal or have her shot. I need to know which one it is. Now, there was a long silence on the other end of the line, followed by the clatter of a keyboard. Sharma, Anya, okay sir, I see her file. Is flagged. Very high classification. I can't. Wait a minute. The captain's tone changed, losing its bureaucratic drone and taking on a note of sharp surprise. Sir, are you at a secure terminal? Yes, damn it, I am. Okay, sir. In your file access system, there should be an option for secondary authentication. It's called the Janus Key Protocol. You'll need to input your command-level access code. Thorne's fingers flew across the keyboard. He entered the long string of alphanumeric characters, a code he had only ever used twice before in his career. The screen blinked, and a new digital file folder appeared next to Sharma's name. It was labeled with a single word, Daedalus. He clicked it open. The screen filled with text, but it wasn't a standard military record. It was a collection of after-action reports, technical analyses, and project summaries, all stamped with a classification level that made his blood run cold. He was reading about Project Daedalus, a joint service initiative that had been a rumor a ghost story whispered among high-level commanders for years. The program took genius-level intellects, engineers, physicists, computer scientists, and put them through the most grueling special operations training imaginable. They weren't soldiers who were taught to be smart. They were geniuses who were taught to be weapons. Their purpose was battlefield innovation, to create solutions where none existed, to see a downed aircraft not as a wreck, but as a collection of spare parts for a surface-to-air missile, to see a broken generator not as a problem, but as an opportunity to build a directed energy weapon. They were the ultimate problem solvers. He scanned the commendations, his eyes widening. A Navy Cross, redacted, for actions during a submarine rescue under the polar ice cap. A Distinguished Service Medal, redacted, for designing a counter-drone system from scrap metal and a truck battery that saved an entire Special Forces team in Syria. A report detailed how she had, by herself, repaired the damaged reactor shielding of a crippled naval vessel while it was underway in hostile waters. Her specialty was listed as hyper-adaptable battlefield engineering. Her call sign, the one whispered in awe in the intelligence community, was Deadless. The mythological creator, the master artisan who could build anything, fix anything. The program had been officially disbanded 2 years ago, its members scattered, their records sealed to protect them. Anya Sharma hadn't been demoted. She had been hidden in plain sight. Colonel Thorne leaned back in his chair, the truth washing over him in a cold, humiliating wave. He hadn't been sent a diversity hire or a pencil pusher. He had been sent a legend, and he had ordered her to count bolts. The wind from the dying storm was cold and clean, washing the dust from the air. Colonel Thorne walked from his command post toward the main hangar, his steps heavy with the weight of his revelation. The base was humming with restored power, a testament to the woman he had so thoroughly misjudged. He felt a profound sense of shame. He had looked at Anya Sharma and seen only what he expected to see. A quiet woman who didn't fit his narrow, preconceived notion of a Marine. He had been blinded by his own arrogance, and it had nearly cost him everything. He entered the vast, echoing space of the hangar. The maintenance crew was gathered in a loose group, their conversations muted. They weren't working. They were all watching one person. Anya Sharma stood alone by a workbench, her back to them. She was not basking in the glow of her success. She was not accepting congratulations. She was disassembling the specialized interface she had used on the F-35's engine, cleaning each component with a small, soft cloth before placing it back into a custom-fitted case. Her focus was absolute, her movements as precise and deliberate as they had been in the heart of the storm. She was a professional finishing her work. Gunny Miller stood nearest to her, his arms crossed, his expression one of deep, contemplative awe. Benitez and Tanaka stood a few feet behind him, ramrod straight, like sentries guarding a sacred site. The entire dynamic of the squadron had been irrevocably altered. The ghost was gone. In her place stood an icon. Thorne walked across the concrete floor, his boots echoing in the sudden silence as the crew noticed his approach. Every Marine in the hangar snapped to attention. All except Anya. She continued her work, seemingly oblivious to the presence of the base commander. Thorne stopped a few feet behind her. He cleared his throat. Warrant Officer Sharma. She paused her work, carefully placing a small microchip onto the cloth. She turned slowly to face him. Her expression was the same as it had always been. Calm, neutral, unreadable. There was no hint of triumph in her eyes. No, I told you so, she simply waited. Thorne looked at this woman, at the grease stain on her cheek she hadn't bothered to wipe away, at the quiet dignity that radiated from her like a physical force. He thought of the file, of the name Deadless, of the lives she had saved, both today and in a dozen other forgotten hellholes around the world. He had been prepared to make a speech, to offer an apology, to try and explain his own foolishness. But looking at her now, he knew that words were insufficient. They were clumsy, noisy things, and she was a creature of quiet, decisive action. So he did the only thing that made sense. Colonel Marcus Thorne, a man who had commanded battalions and earned the respect of generals, drew himself up to his full height, looked Warrant Officer Anya Sharma directly in the eye, and rendered a slow, sharp, perfect salute. The gesture was shocking in its breach of protocol. A full-bird colonel does not salute a warrant officer. It was a gesture of profound, unconditional respect, an acknowledgement that rank was meaningless in the face of her staggering competence. For a moment, Anya just looked at him. Then, a flicker of something, understanding perhaps, passed through her eyes. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. Behind Thorne, Gunny Miller's hand snapped to his brow in a salute of his own. Benitez and Tanaka followed instantly, their movements crisp and emphatic. One by one, every Marine in the hangar raised their hands in a silent, collective tribute. They weren't saluting her rank. They were saluting her. The sun rose the next morning over a clean-swept desert. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, the air scrubbed clean by the storm. The roar of a jet engine, clean and powerful, split the morning silence as Bad Penny, its heart beating strong, took off on its rescheduled patrol. Colonel Thorne watched it climb from the window of his office, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hand. He had already submitted the paperwork, recommending Anya Sharma for the Navy and Marine Corps Medal, the highest non-combat decoration for heroism. He knew it would likely be downgraded and buried in her classified file, another secret commendation for the ghost in his squadron. But it didn't matter. The truth was known here where it counted. He looked out toward the flight line, expecting to see her there, perhaps watching the aircraft she had saved. But she wasn't there. He scanned the bustling activity of the base, the morning routines clicking back into place. He finally saw her near the edge of the tarmac, far away from the glamour of the fighter jets. She was kneeling on the ground next to a portable hydraulic fluid cart, one of the most mundane, overlooked pieces of equipment on the entire base. She had a toolbox open beside her and was methodically tightening a loose fitting on one of its wheels, stopping a small, annoying wobble that everyone else had simply learned to ignore. She wasn't seeking accolades. She wasn't waiting for a parade. Her work yesterday was done, and today presented a new set of problems to be solved, however small. A new nickname was already making its way through the ranks of FOB Nightingale. The Marines didn't call her the Ghost anymore. They didn't call her stupid or slow. When they spoke of her, it was in low, respectful tones. They called her Deadless. Most of them didn't know the name's origin or its classified history, but they understood what it meant. It meant she was the creator, the fixer, the one who could make things work when all hope was lost. Anya Sharma finished tightening the bolt on the cart's wheel. She gave it a test and it rolled true. Satisfied, she closed her toolbox, stood up, and looked out at the horizon. The sun was climbing higher, casting a long, sharp shadow behind her on the tarmac. It was the shadow of a single, quiet woman, but it seemed to stretch all the way back to the hangar, covering the entire squadron in its silent, watchful protection. Her war was not one of bullets and bombs, but of entropy and chaos. And it was a war she would always win.